Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are live for our final session in our medical innovations and women's health. Next week, we will be doing a new program, and after school, we have more stuff coming up. If you want to know about all of our happenings, follow us on Instagram at mymikva, on Facebook, mikva.org, or message 732-534-2948 to be added to our broadcast. If you have any questions during today's session, you can message 732-534-2948, and we will address them at the end of the session. Tonight, we will be hearing all about overcoming emotional obstacles to intimacy with Mrs. Pamela Klein. Pamela is a licensed clinical social worker, an AACECT certified relationship and intimacy therapist. She's worked with couples and women with all types of relationship problems and intimacy problems. She has a private practice in the 5 towns, and she now is also working over Zoom. So without any further ado, I'm going to call Pamela to the screen there. There we go. And remove myself.
Okay. Thank you so much, Cassie. And thank you for everyone for joining us. Okay. So we're going to talk tonight about overcoming emotional obstacles to intimacy. The intimate relationship is one that comes along with a lot of emotions. It's something that there can be a tremendous amount of excitement and pleasure. And at the same time, there can be worries, fear, confusion, and tension. It definitely requires us to invest ourselves and to put a lot of hishtadlus in on both a physical and a psychological level. And when there are obstacles in the way, it can definitely lead to a lot of struggles for couples. I know in the last few classes, you heard from numerous wonderful speakers about some of the physical obstacles that were addressed. And now we're going to pay attention to more of the emotional obstacles and how to work through them. Everyone knows that a crucial part of a strong marriage is that your intimate relationship is functioning and you're both having pleasure and satisfaction when you desire it. And when there's sort of what I call a glitch in the system, it could be very draining and difficult for a couple. And it's important to figure out where things might be getting stuck. So there are 4 phases to the response cycle that happens with intimacy, and a person can really get stuck at any phase. To simplify them, we could say the 4 phases are desire, arousal, climax, and resolution. And these stages are obviously all connected, and a problem in one can spill over to a problem in another, but it's important to start to be aware of where the issue might start. And being that obviously this is a very private and sacred part of our marital lives, we don't know what others are experiencing, right? If we don't know if our struggles are what the average person is experiencing or not, and there's a wide range of what's normal when it comes to intimacy. Therefore, it's important to learn what the average person might be experiencing, so you're going to know whether you're running into a problem and what to do about it. The best way to really know if you're struggling is based on your own instincts to check in if you're really distressed about something going on, if things are not going as you planned. There's help out there. There are wonderful therapists and different resources out there, college teachers that can help when someone is struggling and they can't navigate it on their own. But this workshop is intended to help you identify some of the emotional obstacles and to give you some tools to work on it. But if that's not enough, you can always consider going for more assistance. So what I want to focus on tonight is when a couple is getting stuck in the area of desire, as it's the most common issue that presents itself, and it's something that often spouses are in different pages with. So let's start off by defining what desire is. So we're clear about what we're talking about, because sometimes people, the terms get confused. Sometimes often the word desire and arousal are used interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. So desire is a mental anticipation that one has for being intimate. It's the longing or the thinking about, wanting to have an intimate experience. It's what we would refer to as being in the mood for it when people say like they're in the mood for intimacy. Arousal is a physiological response that comes along with intimacy. It's what happens when the body starts to be awakened and there are physical reactions that happen inside in response to certain stimuli. So desire and arousal really do work independently from each other, and sometimes they even can work in different directions. There could be times where you feel desire, but you're having a hard time getting aroused, or you might be feeling aroused, but you're not having that much desire for it. And people often think they come at the same time and they'll always be there together, but that's not always the way that it works. It's not always that you'll be interested in intimacy and then you will get aroused. And when a couple is experiencing that there's a large gap in their desires, we refer to this as a desire discrepancy, which is basically, the basic meaning of that is that the desire levels or frequency, the desire for how often or for what type of activity is different. It just means there's a difference in their levels of desire. So in general, in a relationship, right, we're going to be different than our spouses in many ways. One may prefer milchik, one may prefer fleishik, right? And they figure it out. One night they may have this, another night they may have that. When a couple goes on vacation, right, one may want to do really adventurous things. One may want to stay in the hotel and just hang around. They will figure it out most of the time, right? But when it comes to the intimate relationship, and we're going to have different needs for the amount of times a week or for different preferences, very often couples do get stuck. Many couples will come to therapy describing their problem as a difference in their desires. And when that difference is extreme, it really can be difficult for a couple to navigate it on their own. We want to notice that there's no judgment in the term mismatched desire or desire discrepancy. It just describes that there is a difference, right? And that difference can be a lot about, very often about frequency, but it could be about how long they want to spend with each other, when they want to have it, how they want to have it. It's not only about like how many times a week, right? And fluctuations in desire are typical. We want to know that, right? It's normal to have, changes and times in your marriage where you'll have a difference. So it's not about the difference in itself, right? It only becomes a problem when this discrepancy becomes very large between the spouses. And it becomes difficult for them to navigate it on their own. And in general, the main issue is not that you have a difference, but rather that we get the message that differences in desire around intimacy indicate there's something wrong with our relationship, or maybe something wrong with one of the spouses. And people start to attach all different sorts of meaning attached to this, and the issue becomes filled with embarrassment, shame, blame, resentment, and that's where it starts to become a problem. In my work and working with people, I normalize that there is variation. There's no normal or right amount of desire for intimacy. Some people want lots of it. Some people want little of it. Both are okay. Again, a lot of it has to do with the difference in where they're falling. And very often when people come in to therapy, they say that there's one spouse that is the higher one and one spouse that is the lower desire one, right? And they want to fix the other person's level of desire, and they tend to pathologize it, right? High desire and low desire are really just relative terms. There's always going to be one spouse that's a higher desire and one spouse that's a lower desire if we're comparing two people, because with comparisons, there's going to be one that's higher and lower. So really, is there such a thing as a normal or abnormal way of experiencing desire? It's also important to know that even though stereotypically it's the man that's a higher desire spouse and the woman that's a lower desire spouse, it can go either way. Both men and women can fall into either category. And really, in order to work on this, spouses need to come to understand each other more and why they're in that role. And, we want to come to a place where we can learn to respect each other's differences and find ways to work together on those differences. And if we can come to that place where we can value and embrace the fact that we're different rather than pathologize it, then that's really the first step in addressing the issue. There's going to be work that we're going to talk about tonight for for each spouse individually, and what to do if you're the lower desire spouse, what to do if you're the higher desire spouse. And then there's the work on the dynamic that often gets set up between them when this is going on for a couple. Okay, so I want to start by talking about some, focusing on the lower desire spouse. That's what a lot of the talk is going to be about, because typically that's where people often, need more help. I mean, I work, a lot with women very often. Like I said, even though stereotypically women are the lower desire spouse, it is something that comes up a lot for women, and it's something we're going to focus on. But I want to start by talking about a few myths around desire. So the first one is that desire for intimacy should come naturally. Most people think that being in the mood for intimacy should just happen out of nowhere, right? It should just happen, on its own without having any effort put into it. In general, right, having a good intimate relationship requires hishtadlus, right? It's not something that just happens on its own. It's something that takes work. So for any of you that are joining us tonight, be proud of yourself for coming and trying to work on this, because it's something that it's just the right step in trying to address some of the things that might be going on. The second myth is that you cannot change your levels of desire. Most people think that their drive is similar to like a physical trait that they can't change in themselves, but really that's not true. The truth is that you can definitely do some things that are in your control to try and help build up desire and try to work with it. The third one is that men are always the higher desire spouse. So I mentioned that a few minutes ago. It's really, I like to say this over and over again because very often, I'll always have people, when I talk to couples, when I talk to married women, I'll always have people that will say, like, oh, but I'm the opposite way, right? So even though we stereotypically do see that, it's not always the case. There are, men and women can both fall into either category. And I've seen many situations that it's like that. The fourth one is that if you're struggling with low desire, it means something is wrong with you or your relationship. It's easy to attach a lot of meaning to why you might be having this. And there could be a lot of reasons for why you're struggling, but it doesn't necessarily have any of this like deep, dark meaning attached to it, and that there's something really wrong with you. And the fifth one is that you should spontaneously want to become intimate. So you may have been labeling yourself, if you're the low desire spouse, as, someone that just has low desire, but maybe it's just that you don't know the difference between spontaneous desire and responsive desire, which is what we're going to talk about. So most people refer to the idea of being in the mood as something they are going to say, whether they feel that they want to have this, looking forward, being in the mood, is they're really referring to what we call spontaneous desire. This is basically referring to going about your day when all of a sudden you start thinking about intimacy, or you get sort of like a rush of interests coming over you, which leads you to having intimacy. And this way of experiencing desire is really what we think of as the normal or better way to have desire, right? Again, it's that concept of being in the mood, like you're looking forward to it, you're excited about it, all of a sudden out of nowhere, this just comes over you. But a lot of research shows that many people, particularly women, don't experience desire before arousal, right? So remember the 4 stages: desire, arousal, orgasm, right, resolution. A lot of people think that desire comes first, but it's been shown that many people experience what we call responsive desire. That is, they're only going to start to actively desire intimacy only after the intimate encounter is underway. So they sort of start with willingness, and their desire blooms as the encounter continues. And this is a perfectly normal and healthy way to experience desire. In other words, you could think that you're not really so interested in being intimate, right? You're just sort of like, I could go read a book. I could go just sit on the couch. I could just, go and do something else. You're just like, you're sort of parve about it. But with the right touch and the willingness to be open to the possibility of getting there and becoming excited, you may, you could start off from that standpoint, and then you can start to engage in intimacy, and the desire will come, right? And this could be very encouraging for, people with low desire, right? Because you think that if you're not desiring it, then you're not going to be able to get there, but it's not necessarily true, right? We, think that spontaneous desire is the norm, and people often pathologize themselves when they have responsive desire, or they think of themselves as like being lesser or broken, and all these problems could be avoided. We just understand that there's 2 different ways of experiencing desire, and they're both totally normal, and the average person experiences that. So the way that you can use that is recognizing that willingness is enough to get started, right? You can try and find opportunities where you're just, somewhat open to getting started and go with that. Some reasons that someone might, sort of, think about why they might be willing could be things like just wanting to experience connection and closeness to your spouse, because it's going to be satisfying in the end as your desire comes, to keep your relationship in a good place, right? There could be a lot of reasons and opportunities that you find to be able to get started. Now, I'm not saying that people who are really dreading it and having very negative feelings towards intimacy this will apply to, right? If you're having very strong, aversive feelings, and that's a different story. We're talking about people who are really coming in more parve, more just like, okay, I could see myself going either way, sort of a feeling towards it, not being so in the mood, and they can get started. Someone who's having negative, strongly negative aversive feelings probably would need to be worked through that in a different way. So if you have responsive desire, then your desire is just going to come in response to some kind of stimuli. It's going to show up when you give it something to respond to. So therefore, you have to bring more stimuli into your life. And we're going to talk about how to do that. So there's something called the dual control model. The idea of the model is that arousal isn't an on and off switch. Instead, we have 2 different switches, but they're more like, you want to say like slider switches that go up and down. And we call one our accelerator and the other one our brake. That is basically to say that things that turn you on hit on your accelerator, and things that turn you off will hit on your brake. The accelerator basically receives information about stimuli in your environment, like things you see, you hear, you smell, you touch, you taste, or you imagine, and it sends signals from the brain to turn on. And this system is basically constantly scanning for reasons to get turned on. The brake notices all of the potential reasons in the environment to basically send signals to turn off. It's like your foot on the brake in a car, right? Responding to stimuli in the moment. It finds the things that are reasons to not get aroused right now. And if anyone drives a car, right, for those of you who do, you know that you can press as hard as you want on the accelerator, but if something is holding down the brake, you're not going anywhere, right? Your car might even actually, get damaged from that, right? In order to get turned on, we first need to take our foot off of the brake. We first have to minimize the things that are not working for us, that are turning us off. So our level of arousal is really going to be a product of how much stimulation the accelerator is getting and how little stimulation the brakes are getting. And often people think that when it comes to low desire, they have to press harder on the accelerator, add more things in, try new things, get a new tip or trick or tool to try and make it all better. And they just think about adding in something exciting. And while that could be okay, if your foot is on the brake, then that's not going to work. It's just like I said, things will just stay at a halt, right? And there could be a lot of different things that could be hitting on your brake, and it takes some work to figure that out, but it's worthwhile to spend some time with your spouse or with yourself, just trying to think about what are the things that really stop me from getting further, or even more so the things that really do, trigger me to get turned off. For one person, their brake can get hit with, let's say their spouse is not freshly showered. For another one, it might be hearing their baby cry in the other room or moving around in the other room. Some things can be more easily fixed than others. For example, if you know that you need your spouse to be freshly showered, make sure you tell him that or her that, right? If you know that the baby, moving around in your room is going to bother you, make sure to put, the baby right outside the room maybe, or a little bit further away when you know they're going to be intimate. Those things sort of take a little bit of brainstorming, talking about. You can usually figure it out. But if it's something more, want to say a little bit deeper, like shame or discomfort around your body image issues, or if there's real anxiety there, then obviously it might take some help from a professional to help get your foot off the brake. So it's important to work on this, right, as a starting point of any point of trying to work on desire, because you need to create a less stressful environment for you by limiting those things, right? So it doesn't mean that eliminating those things will completely make everything fall into place, but it's the point that everyone needs to start from when experiencing low desire. And then after that, you can add in some more stimulation to your accelerator so you could possibly get your desire going. And this is what I do always with couples that come for help, is that we talk about these things, we figure these things out, and we start to minimize those things. And they often see a difference pretty quickly when they start to minimize those things and are able to just allow themselves space to just, take those things off the table so that you can try and, work on building up the desire. Okay, so I want to talk about 4 different factors that could go into desire so you could identify some of the obstacles, right? So we talked about some ways to start working on it. I want to, address some of the things and how to work on it. So the first one is the mental factor. There are so many ways that our brains can get distracted, right, and get in the way when it comes to intimacy. One of the most common things that people with low desire struggle with are distracting thoughts, finding it just hard to be present in the moment. And sometimes it sort of feels like our brain is almost like the enemy, like we just want it to turn off, but it's so hard to do. Just telling it to turn off is not going to work, obviously, right? Just telling yourself to relax is not going to work. There's just a really strong connection between what goes on in our minds and our bodies. And generally, the more a person has on their mind, the harder it is to relax and focus during intimacy, which will definitely inhibit their interest in it. And this is stereotypically more true for women. It's normal for a lot of women to find their mind wandering about kids, work, housework, other responsibilities, many different things. And in many areas of life, I always tell people this, right? Like you could be, for example, cooking for Shabbos, and you could be thinking about all different sorts of things and being on the phone with your sister and be, cooking and all that. And maybe once in a while you'll stop and ask yourself, did I just add salt to that recipe? But for the most part, you really can cook Shabbos while doing all of those things, and it can come out pretty good, right? So in many areas of life, you could be having things running through your head, and that will be just fine. But when it comes to intimacy, the two don't mix, right? when you're having so many thoughts running through your head, it will inhibit your ability to have desire for it, to have arousal. It all gets in the way. And very often I'll ask people, like, what do you think is going through your head? And often they'll tell me, like, I don't know, I don't think there's so much there. And they'll come back the next week and be like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I have a whole list of things that go through my head. And being in your head, like I said, and just getting aroused just don't go together. Very often, aside from just like the random things popping into your head, a lot of people do what's called spectatoring. It's basically like looking in from the outside, like almost going like an outer body experience and stepping outside the experience, but you're watching yourself go through the experience and you're evaluating the intimate experience. Am I enjoying? You may start asking yourself questions like, am I enjoying? Why am I not getting aroused? Am I doing a good job? Is he going to be happy? Is she going to be frustrated, right? Like just all these different questions and evaluations that you have about the experience. And once you're in that headspace, you're not going to be present and it won't work, right? So I would say even more so when people are spectatoring, even more than just thinking of random things, it's even harder because they're judging themselves and they're feeling badly about it and they're, having a lot of negative feelings about it in that moment, which totally will take them away. So what can we do about this, right? When we're finding ourselves really getting distracted. So many of you probably heard of the concept of mindfulness. Mindfulness is a great tool that could be used to help clear the mind and bring us back to the present moment. It's, you can use meditation exercises that teach you how to ground your mind and help you to be able to develop the skill of being able to become more aware of the distractions in your mind and bringing yourself back to the present. So there's apps called like Calm or Headspace. There's like an app that you can find that have short meditations. You can find short meditations anywhere. It's something that people really have to practice doing either formally or informally. They can, I'll tell some clients to just practice when you're brushing your teeth, take that 1 minute of your day and really focus on, what it feels like to have the toothpaste in your mouth and the sound of the water and the bristles going against your teeth. And I'm telling you that most people, even for a minute, have such a hard time even just staying present for that one moment, for that 1 minute. And it's something that they're surprised that it's really hard for their brain to do. Everyone, has distracting thoughts. So it's really about learning how to be able to bring yourself back. And really, there's research that shows that there are neural pathways that are created when you practice mindfulness for I think it's maybe 60 or 90 days. It's for a long period of time, you start to develop this skill and it can get much easier to do. Another thing that I suggest to people is to add in what we call sensory variables so that they can attend to something right in the moment when they find themselves having distracting thoughts. So you could think about using the five senses to be able to help bring in sensory variables into the bedroom. So just for examples, I'll just throw some examples at you. There's many, many more, just thinking about, utilizing these different things that when you use them, it helps you to be able to, when you notice your mind getting distracted, bringing yourself back to one of these things. And you're going to have to do trial and error to see which things work for you. So for example, smell, you might buy a perfume that you really like. You might have an oil that you enjoyed the smell of, a massage oil or something. And when you find yourself getting distracted, for example, you would, let's say if the perfume is on your hand or something, right, you can just sort of take a whiff and it will, help be a neutral sensation that might bring you back to the moment of being right in that moment together. For example, touch, right, getting, having massage oil to help with touch. Let's say having your sheet, if it has like a good feeling to it, you could just take your hands and rub your hands up and down against the sheet and notice what it feels like to touch the sheet. If there's some kind of material that you enjoy touching or like a sequin pillow or a squishy ball, right, having those things, at your disposal to be able to, touch it and be able to, again, bring yourself back. Sight could be, something in the room that just, when you put your eyes on it, it feels soothing to look at. It could just be a color of something, it could be a picture. It could just be having a clean room and you look around and you just sort of can remind yourself of, it feels sort of soothing. It can be a candle that looks pretty, right? Something that, again, there's no right and wrong to it. It's about trial and error and trying to use different things. Sound, some people will get like a noise machine, just having like the white noise or the beach sound, or to be able to have like a very light music on in the background so you could bring yourself back to that. And taste could be something like, I usually tell people, if you have like a piece of chocolate or something that you enjoy, that if you really needed to, you could pop in your mouth and be able to just stay mindful while having it in your mouth, or a candy or something. right? So there's going to be distractions, and then you're going to notice them and bring yourself back to one of these things. And this often can help a lot, right? It's just like a tool to be able to use. Also, another thing that helps a person when it comes to, the mental factor is to make the conscious decision to think about intimacy. It's about being very purposeful about it, right? So I'll suggest to people that they make an effort once a day to think about intimacy for about, 5 to 10 minutes. A lot of people want it to pop in their head, but that doesn't happen for everyone. Not everyone is naturally thinking about it. So you can choose to bring it into your thoughts instead of waiting around for it to happen. You can consider it doing it, pairing it with an activity that you do anyways during the day, like, brushing your teeth or taking a shower or whatever it might be. Or you just, set a kavua time to sort of do this every single day. And when I say actively think about it, you can just go back to a very good intimate experience that you had together. You can visualize something, imagine something, right? Or just think about intimacy in general, right? And hopefully you've had some of these positive experiences to go back to. And it's not about, utilizing that to help you turn on. It's about giving your body an opportunity to respond to some kind of stimuli, right? Again, going back to the idea that we need some kind of stimuli to respond to. So it's important to just have that as something to help just to help have, just the positive sort of feelings going throughout your mind and your body. Another thing that you can do, right, if you're struggling with low desire, is to change the question that you probably ask yourself when it comes to intimacy. If your spouse asks you or you ask yourself, right, do I want to have intimacy right now? Am I in the mood for it? That question does not work very well. It basically sets up the expectation way too high. And really, if you have a responsive drive, this question will not work. And most of the time, the answer is going to be no. Instead, you want to try and ask yourself, am I open to being intimate? See if you're open to the possibility of trying to go there and the opportunity to go there so that you're lowering the bar and setting a more reasonable expectation. You're acknowledging that maybe I'm not totally interested right now. I'm not totally in the mood, but I'm open to the possibility of trying to get there. And you'll find that if you ask yourself this, you're much more likely to probably try to get started. And then hopefully once you get started, that desire will come upon you. Okay. The second factor is the emotional factor, right? So intimacy brings up a ton of emotions, a lot of strong emotions. And it makes sense because being intimate requires us to be really vulnerable on both an emotional and physical level. So it's important that both spouses feel emotionally safe. If we aren't feeling secure in ourselves and our relationship, then it very much can affect our drive. It's important to work on feeling emotionally close, obviously, in general, but there's definitely a connection between our emotional connection and our intimate relationship. They're usually a couple, it usually goes in a positive cycle, right? Then when a couple has a strong emotional connection, we often see there'll be a strong intimate connection as well. So how do we begin to achieve this, right? One way is to think about how well do you know your spouse on an emotional level? I'm not just talking about knowing like what they like for dinner or what their favorite activity is, but really thinking about, do I know them on a deeper level, right? And one way to do this is thinking about your love languages. So if anyone hasn't read the book, The 5 Love Languages, I would urge you to read it. It's really important. And it's something that, can give us a lot of information about our spouses because we all understand and receive love in a different way. And we have to make sure that we know what our spouse's love language is. We don't want to assume it because very often we'll give to our spouse in the way that we want to be given to, right? So if we want to, we really enjoy the gifts and the gifts are the things that really help us to feel loved. We'll often be, sharing our spouse with gifts. But if his love language is quality time, then you're totally missing the boat. So if you're spending your whole lifetime, giving your spouse in the love language that's not theirs, then you will not end up, they may end up not really feeling loved in the same way. They may feel appreciated. They may feel that they appreciate you for what you're doing, but it's really important to take the time to figure this out. And once you have this knowledge, you can then also incorporate their language in the bedroom. So I'm going to talk about the 5 love languages and just give you a nice sense of what it's like outside the bedroom and then what you can try and do to bring it into intimacy. So the first one is words of affirmation, right? So if this is your spouse's love language, then outside the bedroom, you're probably going to share your feelings towards him or her more often. You're going to try to pay attention to things you admire about them and try to give compliments to them, right? So the whole idea of any of these love languages is that it's not just about like taking something and pulling it out of a hat. It's like, oh, you look really nice today. It's about, does your spouse appreciate hearing that? What is it that they want to hear, and trying to do that. When, in the time of intimacy, you can give your spouse compliments about how attractive they are, how much you appreciate your intimate life together, compliment them on something that he or she is doing for you, right? Trying to bring it in terms of words. And the second one is acts of service. So in general, that would be actions that mean something to your spouse, like planning a dinner date together, doing dishes, cleaning up the living room, doing something, planning a surprise for them, right? Something that you're doing actively to do for them. When it comes to the bedroom, you can plan for an entire night, let's say, to be about your spouse. Tell them you want them to just relax and you're going to, be there for them. Or if you show them that intimacy was really important, where let's say you planned a night out and you initiated, maybe setting up the room in a certain way, right, in the way that they like it, and doing some kind of act for them. When it comes to gifts, right, it's anything really small or thoughtful gifts, or big gifts, doesn't matter, right? Just the idea that you're, let's say, putting a sticky note in their lunch, right? It doesn't have to be an actual gift, but it's something that you're, buying for them, giving to them, right? As like, I know you appreciate this. I know you enjoy this. In the bedroom, there's lots of things you could buy each other, right? Something that's more intimate, something more romantic, just something that, again, you're going to appreciate this when it comes to intimacy. Quality time. So that could be, just carving time in your schedule. It's about putting away all distractions, phones, books, children, right? Just time spent together where you have full attention on each other. When it comes to intimacy, it could be just trying to be very present during the experience, making eye contact, listening to each other, just like slowing down the experience and making sure to spend time with each other versus rushing through it and it just be something that just happens versus something that you're connecting with. And obviously physical touch. So this is not necessarily just about intimate touch. This is just general physical touch. It could be a quick hug, a kiss, a pat on the shoulder, a little back rub, right? Just making sure that touch is involved in your intimacy, when it comes to the intimate relationship. So we see it's important, right, for your spouse, to know your love language in order to be able to incorporate it in, both outside and inside the bedroom during intimacy. And whenever you do, anything that sort of is out of your comfort zone, out of your love language, you want to say, just take a second to notice it, what it felt like, right? You can make a list of what, all the feelings that you had that you noticed. Maybe it was after you did something for your spouse, right? That you're sort of like, hey, I would never want this for myself, but I'm going to extend myself to do this for him or her. Just notice what it feels like to just be able to sort of actively give to your spouse and notice, how it makes them feel, to be able to just sort of reinforce for yourself how important this is. Another issue related to our emotional selves is stress, right? So stress is really, I would say, like the number one killer of our desire levels, right? When you're stressed, your body basically thinks you're under attack and it starts to prepare for danger, even on a hormonal physical level, right? Cortisol is a hormone that's released and it's going to shut down all other functions of the body when it thinks that, in some way you're not safe. So basically it's going to shut down, right, your desire, because you don't need to have that when your body thinks that you're under attack in some kind of way. But obviously you're not under attack, right? And stress sort of tricks us to believe that, but you can make active efforts to combat that stress, right? And one thing that helps tremendously when it comes to stress is self-care, right? Just in general, making decisions throughout the day just to treat yourself well. Some examples would be going for a walk, going to bed earlier, sleeping in one morning, taking a long bath or shower, visualizing something or a place that makes you feel very calm and peaceful, taking a mental health day from work, reading a book, buying yourself a gift, writing in a journal, right? There's obviously tons and tons and tons of self-care practices. What I usually encourage people to do is to make a list of things they can do for self-care and to make 3 different categories. Knowing if they only have 1 minute during the day, things they can do if they have 10 minutes during the day, and things they can do if they have 1 hour a day. Right? So depending on your life and what's going on, how much time you'll have, I want people to be able to have, the ability to turn to their list and be like, okay, I only have 1 minute today. Let me just quickly do something for self-care. But if every day it's only 1 minute, then you got to try to make a little more time for it. Right? But it's important to be doing these things so that you can really be able to, at least bring down the stress levels. Obviously, if there's a tremendous amount of anxiety or stress there, these are not things that will just help automatically. But, again, sometimes professional help is needed in those situations. Okay, the third one is the sensual factor. So this is really about the quality of the intimacy that you're having. There's a connection between the quality of the intimacy you're having and your desire level. There's no question about that. And if you're having intimacy that's painful, disconnected, boring, anything that really is, not such a pleasurable experience, you're not going to crave having it. But if you have intimacy that's more exciting and novel and enjoyable and connecting, you're probably going to be more open to it. So what are some of the things that can get in the way? Obviously, this is just a short list of things. I'm just telling you about the most common things so you could sort of see if you identify with any of these things or any of these things resonate with you. So the first one is performance pressure. Pressure that their body won't do what they want them to do what their spouse is expecting them to do, right? Just that they're going to, in some way their performance or their ability to get aroused is going to be compromised. And if you're worrying about that and that has happened to you, then it for sure is going to affect your wanting to go into the experience. The second one is emotions or stress about things outside the bedroom, right? So you may feel we're not talking about, just general, right, stress, emotions. You may feel sad, embarrassed, unhappy. That's something that's happening inside or outside your relationship. And for people, obviously, when they're just having emotional experiences, it can affect your desire levels and your intimate experience. Conditions that are unmet or conflicting. So for example, if someone says, I only want to be intimate in our own home, when we go away for Shabbos, I don't like being intimate at my parents' house, right? If that's their condition and that's what they need, we can't tell them, no, just, get past that, right? It's important that your conditions are met. Obviously, if the list of conditions are super long, you have to question why that is. But most people have a couple of things that are important to them, and people think they should be able to override them. If they really enjoyed it, they wouldn't have this list of things, but it's not necessarily true. It's hard to get in the mood of your conditions will not be met. Another thing is problems with initiation, right? So if the initiation process isn't working for you, that can really set things in the right or wrong direction. So you need to think about how you initiate. I always ask that question: who usually initiates, how it usually feels, what time of day, do you want to change that, right? But definitely how things get started will either help or hinder your ability to get there. If your intimacy just isn't satisfying, right? So obviously that's in general, but we always ask the question of, maybe you're reaching certain markers, right? Maybe you're able to have an orgasm or you're able to, get aroused, but you're just not enjoying it so much. And that can happen, right? So sometimes it has to do with where your mental headspace is and, many different things. And the last one is not feeling the willingness to engage in intimacy. So this is really can obviously hurt your desire. Any sort of internal or external pressure will definitely affect your desire levels. So if there is, if you're pressuring yourself to get there, right, you're sort of like, I have to, this is what a good wife husband does. If your spouse is obviously pressuring you, then definitely you're not going to feel that willingness. And that is probably you want to say one of the biggest issues of what can get in the way of desire. So if that's going on for you, definitely something you want to think about how to address it, because it's something that can really get in the way. Okay. The next one is the relational factor, right? So I want to first address the dynamic that often gets set up when people are struggling with this, right? Obviously, it affects the relationship when couples are having a desire discrepancy, when one is having lower desire than the other. It can, just having this difference can be very draining for a couple. And a lot of emotions come up when people get caught up in this dynamic. We refer to it as the pursuer-withdrawer cycle. It's easy to identify which category you fall into. Usually the spouse with higher desire is going to be the one pursuing, and the spouse with lower desire is going to be the one withdrawing. And they're each distressed by this, right? It's not like they're both suffering in their own way. It's not like one is having a better time than the other. They're both having strong emotions when it comes up, when this is coming up for them. And what's really important is to try to understand what your spouse is experiencing when either they're being pursued or when they're withdrawing, right? It's important to try to get a sense of what's going on for them. So let's talk about some of those feelings. So usually the high desire spouse is feeling rejected, right? They're taking this all very personally. They may feel like maybe they're unattractive or they're undesirable, and they're having a very hard time understanding any other reason why their spouse wouldn't want to be intimate with them. And eventually it often tends to lead to a lot of frustration and maybe anger. And, that's something sometimes they will share with their spouse. But usually beneath that anger and frustration, when you can sort of get beneath it, their sadness and hurt and just like longing for their spouse to want to, be intimate with them. And this makes them just often try to work harder to prove they're desirable. And they start to run after their spouse. They start pursuing him. And often this, does not work. And they're often met with a lot of resistance. The spouse with lower desire tends to often feel anxious, overwhelmed, and suffocated, not feeling like they're having their space. And over time, they tend to pull back and withdraw. They often feel a lot of pressure and guilt, which can often lead them to being intimate at times that they don't really want to be. And they tend to shut down very often over time, where any physical contact sometimes goes out the window. Right? We're hoping it doesn't get that bad, but sometimes that can happen. And it's important to identify the stance that's going on between the two of you, because in order to be able to work on it, you have to know what's going on, right? And it's not something that we need to recognize, right? That neither spouse is more to blame for the situation. That's why we say it's a dynamic. They're reacting to one another. And once each spouse can see this, right, and understand their role in the cycle and each take responsibility for their half, they can start to work on it, right? So it's really the start of the work is taking away all of the blame, either on yourself or on your spouse, and seeing it as something you have to work on together. You work on everything else together. Why wouldn't you work on intimacy together? And I think it's important to know that struggling with desire is really a couple's issue, right? Even though, very often women are coming to me for, let's say, being the lower desire spouse. Often when they call me up, they'll be like, my husband doesn't have to come with me. I'm the one that has the problem. I'm the one that has the issue. I need to be fixed. And I'll explain to them that it's really rarely one-sided. It's a dynamic that has to be worked on together, and the two of you have to be working at it from a team standpoint, rather than feeling like one or another just has to come to be, fixed. So some ways you can work on it together, right, is starting by communicating about it, right? Having a conversation about, whether you're the pursuer or the withdrawer. You can use this language to help you to be able to talk about it, and try to see if you can start to talk about and understand your spouse's emotions that are coming up for each of you, right? You need to really be working together, like I said, as a team in order to be able to, work at this issue and communicate about it. And if you struggle with communication and you don't end up doing it, it leaves a lot of room for misunderstandings and frustrations and disappointments. And it's really important that, you're making sure that you're having ongoing communication about intimacy with your spouse. And you want to try to clarify, the person who is having particularly the lower desire, you want to try to clarify for yourself and for, your spouse, that what it is that you're really not interested in, what's not working for you, and what is working for you. Because sometimes when it comes to low desire, you sort of feel like, I'm not in the mood for any of it, right? It's not just about the end of it. It's not even about the part that's really intimate. It's like, I don't even want to be touched. Though, like I said, a lot of times that will happen. But what's very important to think about, right, is thinking about what is it that really you're not in the mood for, and to be able to have that conversation. So it's also, again, thinking about your breaks, thinking about what, you need to minimize. So one way that I break it down for some couples is to say, talk about what your limits are and what you're open to doing. So if you break it down to 3 categories, what I know I like to do. So these would be things and activities that you're comfortable and you enjoy doing. What I might be willing to try. So these are activities that under the right circumstances, you'll be willing to try. It's that question of am I open right now for the possibility of getting there? Am I open right now to being able to try something new? And then we can talk about it and we can see, was it okay for me? Was it not? And we can just work together at that. And then what am I not interested in trying, at least for now? So these are things that you would imagine that right now you're not open to doing, things that maybe make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. So at least they're not on the table right now, but you're willing to maybe explore that at a different time. And this very much sets up a conversation that needs to be had about your limitations right now, and what you are open to doing. So maybe you're like in a place in your life where you're just, let's say you have a really crazy job, or you have a newborn baby, something's going on for you, right? And right now that, this is what I like to do, and this is what I'm willing to do. This is what I'm not interested in doing. Maybe I'm not interested in, starting at 10 o'clock at night because I'm just so exhausted from being up all night with the baby, right? If you are able to share that with your spouse, and these things will change over the lifetime of the intimate experience, obviously, right? Things will go up and down, things will change, and that's why it requires constant communication. So you're being able to share, right, what you are open to. it gives the person with low desire the permission to have some kind of space for what they need, right? Which will make a huge difference for them. It's not about, you have to do this, you have to get there, right? It's about trying to help them see that they can have some space to say, this is what I can and this is what I can't do right now. And this requires a lot of checking in on yourself, both emotionally and physically. And like I said, it will change based on different life circumstances and what's going on. It's not about, like creating a perfect situation that you're trying to work towards. It's about checking in with yourself and knowing when you're awake enough and you're calm enough and you're happy enough, and there's just an opportunity to try and get there, and then you can communicate that with your spouse. So what I usually tell people also to do, if they're unsure if they can get there, right? Maybe you're not sure, what you're willing to try, what you enjoy doing, but you're just not sure, like, can I get there tonight or not? Discuss it with your spouse, right? There's nothing wrong with saying, I'm struggling with being in the mood tonight, but I'm really open to trying to get there to a point where maybe we can work for both of us, right? Could we start going slow, just start off very slowly and see where it's getting us to, right? Having the ability to be able to say that for someone who's having low desire helps tremendously, because it doesn't create this pressure inside of them of like, if I get started, I have to go all the way. It gives them the feeling of like, you can try and work together and set up proper expectations to try and stay in the same playing field. And if you find that you tried to get there and you couldn't get there, you may, try to finish up quickly, or you may say, okay, let's try again a different night. Just the ability to sort of have that ability to communicate and have the option to be able to say, I'm just not sure where I can go tonight, will help tremendously to be able to, sort through a lot of those issues. Okay, so now let's talk about the higher desire spouse, which, like I said, we're going to less focus on tonight, but want to give you some tips about that also. So very often the higher desire spouse is expressing their distress in sometimes a way that can be counterproductive. It can be really distressing, and we can validate that, to be in a relationship with a spouse that has a much lower desire level than you. There's no question about that. That it's difficult to be in that kind of relationship. But there are more effective strategies and less effective strategies when it comes to trying to work on this. Very often the higher desire spouse is just putting a lot of pressure without realizing it on the other spouse. If there's a sense of pressure or entitlement or frustration or nagging, it's likely to result in even less desire and more withdrawing from your spouse, and they're just going to need to pull back more and more in order to protect themselves. We want to try to stay away from this. And usually, like we said, it just leads to more rejection, and usually the higher desire spouse self-esteem gets affected by it also, because they keep dealing with rejection. Eventually, sometimes they'll shut down too at some point, because they're trying, and nothing seems to be working. It's important to understand that this is coming from a place of pain and sadness, that they just cannot connect to their spouse in the way that they want to in their love language. And the more we also allow for them to be able to speak about their hurt and their sadness and the pain in a productive way that has to be learned how to be talked about in a way that's not blaming or accusatory about their feelings, the more they feel like they can talk about it, versus they have to just be the strong one. They have to just be the one waiting around. If they can at least talk about it, it helps them to be able to feel a little bit lighter. And, it's something that it's important to just understand that it's not just about that their physical need is not being met. It's much more about their emotional need is not being met, to feel desired and wanted and connected to their spouse in that way. So what can you try and do if you're the higher desire spouse? So the first thing is work on not taking it so personally. Like I said earlier, many people, when they're the higher desire spouse, cannot understand why they shouldn't make meaning out of this. It has to mean that my spouse is not interested in me, or they're not attracted to me, or, I'm just not desirable for whatever reason. And really often has nothing to do with the spouse, right? If the lower desire spouse is just someone who, like I said, it just gets very distracted easily and has a lot of thoughts, swirling through his or her head, then that's the thing that's taking, them away. It's not necessarily about you. So it's likely that something going on with that person individually. It needs to be sorted out. And it's important that if you, are concerned about this, you ask your spouse for that reassurance. Tell them how difficult it is for you to not really know why they're struggling with this, and you're coming up with all sorts of, reasons why, and it's painful for you. The second thing is working on accepting a gift of love if the lower desire spouse is up to giving it. So sometimes your spouse is going to be okay with being together, even if they're not so into it. rather than, feeling insulted by that, which a lot of times a higher desire spouse feels. They feel like, I don't need favors, right? Like, let's just push it off. And they try to just, find the right time for it. It doesn't always work so well, right? Obviously, if every single time you're, being intimate in that way, then there's a problem and it has to be addressed. But sometimes, right, in healthy relationships, we do things for our spouses, even if we don't feel 100% there in that moment. So it's, again, not about when they're feeling really negative and your spouse is shut down and they're doing it from that standpoint because they feel like they have no choice. We're talking about when they're doing it from a place of love and care and like, I'm just not so in the mood right now, but I really want you to enjoy, and hopefully I'll get there too somewhat, and we'll be able to connect together. Try and just recognize that and take that as an opportunity to work together versus pushing them away when they're doing that by saying like, I don't want to have that favor. The third thing is to take a step back and, but be honest, right? And communicate about your feelings. So we encourage the higher desire spouse to, stop that that nagging, pursuing sort of behavior, but they should be communicating, like I said before, about how hard this is for them and their feelings of hurt. Being open and honest might be hard for the lower desire spouse, but it only builds up frustration and resentment when you're holding any sort of feelings in, for sure, feelings about this. The fourth thing is trying to find other ways aside from the physical relationship to feel desired and loved, right? Communicate other ways that sort of work for you, right? Even though your love language might be this, you may find other things that still, maybe not be your primary love language, but other ways that your spouse can show you that they care about you, that they're thinking about you, that they're desiring you, so that you can at least feel some of that connection. And the fifth one would be carving out time for affectionate touch without going further, right? So it's really important to let your spouse know, even if you can't get all the way, right? It's just important to me to have that physical touch, that connection through touch, because very often the higher desire spouse, again, it's not so much of a physical need, it's an emotional need that they feel closer through intimacy. So even if there can be some level of intimacy without going all the way, help them, help your spouse to know this is important for you and something that you would appreciate, even if it's something that, they can't do. Often they don't want to get started because they feel like if they get started, it's like a tease. And then, even a cuddle will just be something that will be frustrating. So you can let them know that. Okay, so obviously in all of this, communication is the greatest tool that you're going to have when dealing with desire discrepancy. And it's extremely important that you're talking about any of the things that we spoke about tonight. Are extremely important that you're, talking about these things, about what you're each experiencing and what you're each, where are some of these, places that you're getting stuck and how you can sort of work at this. So I wanted to give, a lot of times when I talk about communication, people ask for like a step-by-step process to talking about something like this. So we're going to just run through an example, a made-up example, right, of a couple named Moshe and Sarah. Right? They're basically, in this example, they're trying to conceive for some time, and he's been feeling frustrated that they tend to be intimate at the start of the month, but then once she's not ovulating anymore, her desire tends to go down. So how can he discuss this with her? Obviously, it's a touchy subject. Any of these things are a touchy subject, but how can they work together to try and talk about this, okay? So step one would be to stick to the facts, right? So if he would sound accusatory and blaming and say, we're only intimate when you want to get pregnant, that probably would make her put up her defenses and, probably, reject him for what he's saying. Maybe she would get angry, yell back, right? But if instead he started out by saying, Sarah, since you came back from the mikvah, you only agreed to be intimate on the nights that you were ovulating. And after that, we weren't intimate the rest of the month, right? Just the plain facts of what happened, right? There's no accusation there. It's just speaking out the truth of what it was, just the facts of it. The second thing would be to share the story that you tell yourself, right? So share with your spouse the story you're telling yourself. There's an author named Brene Brown. She talks about this as her phrase that she uses, right? It says, the best way to phrase this is the story I tell about myself is. And as we discussed, because we tend to make a lot of meaning out of this about why we're having the lower desire, why our spouse is having the lower desire or the higher desire, you want to try to just stick to this. The story I tell myself in this example is that you're not really desiring me and only want to be intimate with me just to get pregnant, right? So he might be feeling just like, okay, this is just about getting pregnant, but really you don't desire me. And that's the feeling that he's having. And this is the story that he's telling himself. So the third step would be addressing, share how this narrative makes you feel, right? So try to think past the emotions of anger, resentment, frustration, which we call like the harder emotions, because often if we would just say, this is making me feel really angry, right? Our spouse has a harder time hearing that. But if we say something like, going to what we would say are the softer emotions, like I'm feeling really sad, I'm feeling lonely, I'm feeling disappointed, right? It's about what the situation is making you feel as opposed to what you are making you feel, right? So you would basically say something like, in this situation, the situation is making me feel undesirable and insecure about our relationship. The fourth step would be ask for what you need your spouse to do. So if we're asking for something, we're not demanding it. We're not putting this expectation of, I asked you for it, you got to do it now, right? You want to think about what you would need your spouse to do so you would stop telling yourself that story. You could say something like, in this situation, right? He may say, I would really appreciate if you made more of an effort to be intimate at other times and that it's not so goal-oriented. And the fifth one would be offering a suggestion to help your spouse do what you're asking for, right? So you're showing that you want to work together. It's not just like putting it on them, like this is up to you and you're out of the picture. So you want to be able to say, would you be up to scheduling it so it happens both while you're ovulating and the rest of the month? Or could you show me that you desire me in other ways, even if you are not up for, being intimate, right? So just sort of giving a suggestion that might work, right? So this is just a framework. Obviously, you can, plug in any situation into these, 5 steps if you're struggling with being able to communicate about it and you sort of need a script to follow. So this is, I want to just finish off by, saying that obviously, we went through all these things around desire. This can apply to really all areas of intimacy, all these different, obstacles. So whether you're dealing with a desire discrepancy or you're just dealing with general intimacy problems, you can apply any of the principles that we spoke about to really all of it because it generally is all the same. Hopefully you gained a few tools to be able to navigate some of the things that you're going through. And if anyone has any specific questions, you can reach me at my email address or my phone number. I'm happy to be a resource for anyone that just has a question or is unsure about something, whether it's something that, just not sure if this is a problem or not. I'm always happy to be a resource for, anyone that I can help out in any sort of way.
Thank you so much, Pamela. That was so incredibly helpful and detailed. I'm going to go ahead and ask you some questions.
Sure.
Okay, so, number one, what happens if you were never really attracted to your spouse and you still aren't?
That's a loaded question, right? So, obviously, this does come up, right? I think that attraction, stereotypically for men and women can be something that, has a little bit of different elements to it. Attraction always has both physical and emotional components to it, right? So it's not necessarily that one negates the other, right? That like, oh, if you are emotionally close, automatically you're going to feel attracted to them. There's a lot of different elements, obviously, to attraction. There are some things that if you can work on together, right? Meaning, obviously, you're not going to come out and tell your spouse, I'm not attracted to you. But if there are ways, if you really do generally have a very strong and healthy relationship, there are ways to bring up if there are certain things that would help you. For example, if you knew that, if someone was really freshly showered, or if they, would put on certain clothing, or if they would write, like, I think that, again, it's a hard thing to navigate. A lot of couples, it's a very sensitive topic to navigate. So it's not something you could automatically just speak out, but it's something that, if you are married to each other, right, and you're working together, it can be helped by trying to add in variables that helps the attraction. But if it's something that there are things that are getting in your way, you may need help from a professional sometimes to be able to sort of get your head out of this place. Because sometimes people get so stuck emotionally on, oh my gosh, I'm not attracted, that they get so stuck in that they're always in their head about it. They're always evaluating it, that sometimes could be more of the issue than the initial attraction issue itself.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarity. Okay, next question. All right, you mentioned the 5 love languages. So what happens if a woman feels that she likes all 5 love languages? Everything seems great, and her husband seems to not appreciate or find any of them meaningful. How do you resolve that?
Right. So I think,
how can we express the love anyways?
Right. So when someone, a lot of times I find that when people can't find any love language that speaks to them, there's usually, I'm not going to say, I'm saying this, more a broader generalization, but usually the people that are coming to me that are dealing with that, usually across the board, I would say that very often this person has a hard time accepting love, feeling connected, being able to, have someone give to them in some kind of way. So whenever someone tells me there's no love language that I appreciate, we sometimes have to be concerned about it, right? Like, what is that? Why is that? And being able to check in with yourself if you are comfortable with receiving love, giving love, all of the above, right? Something to think about. If you love all of them, you're like, oh, every love language I appreciate, you want to dig a little bit deeper, right? Because of course you're going to, for the most part, right? People are going to appreciate if someone gave you a gift, or if they said something nice to you, or if your spouse, carved out time for you in your relationship, you're going to appreciate that, right? But if you're like, oh, everything sounds great, then that's why the book is really great, because they have like quizzes in there and very detailed, information in there in terms of really pinpointing, like, when you're reading it, to notice like when your heart pitter patters a little bit more, right? Like, oh, that's really the one that would speak to me when my husband does this, right? That's really the one that speaks to me. So either way, right, most people will find one. And if they can't find any, you want to think about it. If you're finding all of them, you want to think about it a little bit further too.
Thank you. So you're saying if you find all of them, maybe pinpoint a little better which one's your main one, and if you can't find any, then think about why that is or seek help. Okay. Do you have any tips for someone who's had resentment from issues in the relationships they've had in the past? They've had an issue in the relationship in the past. They've resolved that issue, but there's still lingering resentment. What should they do? That is coming up.
Right. So, I think that sometimes people do hold on to, things in their emotions in their body more than in their minds, right? Sometimes we're like, okay, we got over that. We got past that, right? Sometimes it's not even together, right? They're sort of like, oh, they just worked it through in their head, but really they're, not past it, right? And I've seen that many times where they logically move past it, but a lot of times very intense emotions live inside of us, even though we're, in our minds, we sorted it out. So you want to think about that, right? Like, what's going on inside. It obviously depends on the level you want to say of like trauma in the relationship or difficulties in the relationship, of how much that was there. A lot of times resentment builds because people are not actually talking about the things they have to talk about. They're more so, just like working through it and like rationalizing it and getting past it. If you are having resentment, you want to check in with yourself and see sort of, where it's coming from. Is it something you can share with your spouse? Can you tell them, I know this makes no sense. It happened a year ago, but I'm still, sometimes it comes up for me and it triggers me. And sometimes just your spouse being really empathetic and understanding and listening to you can help resolve some of it. Checking in with what you might need emotionally. Do you need reassurance? Do you need him to, say, I really get it. It makes a lot of sense. You need validation, right, of like what it is. Obviously, if you're trying all these things again, right, and it's just lingering and not going away, you may need more help to be able to navigate it. But for the most part, I think a lot of things can be worked through in a couple if you have, if you have a spouse that wants to work with you and is willing to help you through it.
Thank you. Okay. How do I know if my spouse is actually ready or if he's just saying yes because I asked? I feel bad if they're not actually in the mood.
Okay, so this could go obviously either way, right? How do you know if, your spouse is just, saying yes because you asked for it, or is it something that they're really interested in doing? Obviously, most people want to, be intimate with someone that wants to be intimate with them, and that makes sense, right? I think a lot of it is attunement, right? Is obviously being newly married, this is harder, but as you're married for a little bit of time, you're more attuned to your spouse and you can get the sense from them of, sort of an obligatory yes or a yes that's coming from the right place. If you're not sure and you're sensing from your spouse, like they seem to be saying yes, but it's just something that like something feels off about it, I would tell you, encourage you, not in that moment, but afterwards, the next day, whatever, to open a conversation about it. Say, I noticed that when you were there, you just didn't really seem so into it. Or I noticed that you like seemed to say yes, but like part of you looked like, looked like a no. And being able to communicate about that and being able to check in and encouraging your spouse to talk about it if they're struggling. Because the worst thing is to be on two different pages for a long period of time and to have a situation where, a long time is going by where it was like, oh, I never enjoy this, but I said yes anyways, right? And you don't want to be in that position. So if you're getting any signs or, you're questioning the yes, then I would say definitely open a conversation about it.
Thank you, Pamela, for so many practical tips on ways of improving our holiest space. We actually don't have any more questions that came in. So I'm going to thank you all for joining us. And I'm going to encourage you that, if you need private hashkafic or halachic advice, reach out to a kala teacher at mikvah.org/instructors. If you need private professional help, Pamela Klein's, I'm bringing up her information again there one more time. Pamela Klein, LCSW at Gmail, 718-395-9185. I'd like to encourage you all to follow us on social media, at My Mikvah on Instagram, mikvah.org on Facebook, and or on the broadcast 732-534-2948. Coming up next week, we've got Safety Kids, a workshop for parents, empowering all parents with the tools they need to help keep their children safe from toddlerhood through camp-age children and teens. mikvah.org/live, 8:30 p.m. next Wednesday. Good night, and thank you for joining us.